All right. Hey guys. So this is going to be part two of this little three-part series talking about the relationship between the brain, personality, and exercise performance. So in the first video, I went over kind of like the basic neurochemistry, going over the different neurotransmitters that are involved with performance, just to kind of give a brief overview and give some context for what I'm going to be talking about today and in the next video. So today's video is going to be more so about the assessments of personalities and their associations with different neurotransmitters. So I'm going to be focusing on three of them with a bonus one at the end. But I want to preface by saying that there is other not necessarily assessments, but there have been different, say, psychiatrists or philosophers that have previously made associations between different personality types and different conditions. So the one that I found really interesting was there's something called the Sasang Constitution. I believe that's what it's called. But basically it's explaining the kind of this yin yang in personality. So there's different, I believe there's 4 personality types, or people were categorized in 4 different types. And based off these types, they were associated with potential illnesses or potential body types. So the use of personality assessments or analyzing someone's temperament has been used in medicine and in other forms of let's say science for a very long time. But for my research and kind of my presentation now, I'm going to be focusing on the Temperament and Character Inventory by Dr. Cloninger, the Neo Ffi, the Braverman Nature Assessment, and then I'll be talking a little bit about, I'm just going to give a brief overview of Christian Thibaudeau's Neurotyping System. So first, the Temperament and Character Inventory, or the TCI. Again, that was developed by Dr. Cloninger. And I'm going to be focusing more on 3 of the 4 temperaments. There's a 4th called persistence, but the reason why I won't be mentioning it is because it wasn't associated with a specific neurotransmitter. But the first temperament is reward dependence. So it's a scale of a person's, say, response to signals of reward, or to maintain or resist extinction of a behavior that was associated with a reward. Okay, and then Cloninger associated reward dependence with the noradrenergic system. The next temperament was novelty seeking. And as the name suggests, novelty seeking explains responses with a person's response with excitement to a novel stimulus or a cue for potential rewards. Okay, so the novelty seeking was associated with the dopaminergic system. But what you could see is that, if you think about them and kind of what people think of dopamine and norepinephrine, these two can go kind of hand in hand, in my opinion. Dopamine and norepinephrine are very similar in terms of, functions or associations with behavior because of their, let's say, relationship. So again, norepinephrine or dopamine is actually a precursor to norepinephrine. So they share similar characteristics. So for example, people think of the adrenaline rush. An adrenaline rush you get from something potentially exciting or something new, and then there's also the dopamine, where people associate dopamine with rewards or accomplishments. So, just based off my personal experience and some of the other literature that I've seen, these two are a little bit interchangeable. But what Cloninger states is that dopamine actually initiates a behavior, and then norepinephrine maintains that behavior. So again, dopamine is associated with behavior that seeks novelty stimuli or cues for reward, And then the noradrenergic system is involved with maintaining that behavior that leads to reward. One specific thing I want to mention about both of these temperament and neurotransmitter associations is that these are a high level of reward dependence is actually associated with low norepinephrine levels or low adrenergic activity. However, this is an indication of high sensitivity to this neurotransmitter. And the same thing applies to dopamine and novelty seeking. So high novelty seeking is associated with low dopaminergic activity and high sensitivity. The reason being is that these low levels at baseline and the sensitivity to these neurotransmitters, as soon as there's a small increase in either of these systems activity or the specific neurotransmitters, it is actually this increase that elicits the behaviors seen by high reward dependence or high novelty seeking. So again, I just want to reiterate that there's low basal neurotransmitter levels for both of these systems, which causes an increase in sensitivity to increases in these neurotransmitters. So what's characterized as high reward dependence or high novelty seeking is actually a result of increases of both of these neurotransmitters. So due to the increase in sensitivity, there's a large increase or a large effect of these neurotransmitters as soon as they're increased slightly, which eventually leads to the behaviors characterized by reward dependence and novelty seeking. Then finally, harm avoidance. Harm avoidance is kind of, it's explained exactly what the name of the temperament suggests. So harm avoidance means response to intensely to signals of aversive stimuli. So it's essentially a way for an individual to protect themselves from harm by showing this inhibitory behavior. So what differentiates harm avoidance from the other two temperaments is that high levels of harm avoidance is associated with high levels of serotonin. Okay. Now, to the Neo Ffi, again, the Neo Ffi is more complex than what I'm going to be talking about. But for the sake of, let's say, my research and what I'm going to be talking about, I'm only going to focus on neuroticism, extroversion, and openness. So neuroticism refers to an individual's stability of personality. So how stable are they at receiving different stressors or stimuli? So someone with high levels of neuroticism is characterized as being neurotic. So what that signifies is that their personality or their temperament is slightly unstable, meaning that as soon as there are stressors, that stressor is kind of exacerbated. So they perceive it much greater than it truly is. Someone with low neuroticism is characterized as being stable, meaning that, the way I think about it is that when there's troubles or stress in their life, they kind of take it in stride. Nothing seems to bother them or not bother them as much. Extroversion is pretty self-explanatory. It refers to how, let's say, outgoing someone is. So a high score on extroversion is an indication of an extroverted personality, and a low score on extroversion indicates someone who's more introverted. Now, the last one is openness. Openness is a little similar to extroversion. It refers to, let's say, how open someone is to new environments, new experiences. So someone with a high score on openness tends to be more adventurous, where someone with a low score on openness tends to prefer, let's say, familiar environments. They don't like to explore too much. Now, the reason why I talk about the Neo Ffi, although not associated with specific neurotransmitters, is that they were related or they were found later through other research to be correlated with neurotransmitter systems. So first, extroversion was related to dopamine and the dopaminergic system, specifically similar to novelty seeking. Low dopamine levels or high sensitivity tend to be more extroverted. So slight increases in dopamine lead to that extroverted behavior. Then Zuckerman and Kloniger later found a positive correlation between harm avoidance and neuroticism, as well as a negative correlation between harm avoidance and extroversion. Now, if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. So someone who's more harm avoidant tends to show inhibitory behavior, tries to protect themselves from any potential harm. So they kind of stay in their own comfort zone. So those people tend to be, more introverted. They're not as outgoing because they're scared of the unexpected or the unknown. And same thing, they perform these behaviors as a way to protect themselves. I believe because unconsciously they know that stressors affect them greater than they truly are. So they tend to show a more unstable personality, or higher levels of, or a higher score of neuroticism. Now we get to more, the systems more related to, say, exercise. So the first one that I heard specifically using personality assessments for exercise was Charles Poliquin. He used the Braverman Nature Assessment, as well as some Eastern, say, philosophy. So like he was big on the yin and yang philosophy. He was big on the different personality types related to nature, like the earth. I believe it was earth, wind, wood, fire, and water, if I didn't say that already. Anyways, the Braverman Nature Assessment was developed by Dr. Eric Braverman. And in the assessment, there's both a dominance and a deficiency section. So basically, it's true or false questions, and based off the results, it associates you with a neurotransmitter dominance, as well as finding any potential deficiencies. So Braverman, after reading his book, it seems like it was typically used for patients dealing with, say, psychological issues such as depression or anxiety. And he would try to find these dominances as well as deficiencies to prescribe certain nutritional protocols or change different pharmaceuticals to suit the individual needs and to balance out the neurotransmitters. Anyways, Poliquin used the system or this assessment to characterize his athletes as either dopamine, acetylcholine, serotonin, or Gaba dominant. I'm not going to go too much into how he used it, but basically the dopamine type were characterized by Braverman as being powerful. And I actually prefer the way Poliquin refers to the dopamine type. He kind of characterized them as being the frontline soldiers. So these are the types that are, they're going to be right at the door. They're going to barge through the door, guns blazing. That's what they seek. That's what they get a thrill from it. They tend to be very, extroverted, impulsive. So yeah, it goes hand in hand with, the Braverman and Poliquin, and depending on their dominance, they would train a certain style or certain training variables would be adjusted. Acetylcholine are characterized as being creative. I kind of think of them more as intuitive thinkers. Poliquin made another good analogy. These are, let's say, the snipers. So these are the ones that are up on a rooftop, scoping someone out, and they could spend hours and potentially days waiting for their target to arrive. But what they do is they never deter, they never lose focus. So they're having that ability, again, with acetylcholine's function with mental acuity, attentional performance, and focus. Those characterized as being acetylcholine dominant are typically, are able to maintain focus for very long periods of time. The serotonin types are characterized as being playful. So they're, let's say in sports, they're the playmakers. They're the ones that are on highlight reels. They're very creative. They like to play the game just for fun. Maybe they don't like practice as much, but once they're given free reins, they're very creative and they just love to play. Now, I want to make a quick point. This characterization of serotonin dominant is very different than what Cloninger or the TCI suggests of a serotonin dominant. But what Braverman mentions in his book and when explaining the system or the assessment is that high levels of serotonin lead to basically this harm avoidant behavior that Cloninger mentions, whereas Braverman is talking about like a healthy balance of serotonin, leading to this playful, very open behavior. Then finally, we come to the Gaba type. They're characterized as being stable, and it's a little bit different than, say, stable in terms of personality and neuroticism. Stable, they're the ones that you could count on. They're very accountable. They like organization, structure, and they function well in very comfortable environments. They like to control things just to avoid any potential danger. So they show some harm avoidant behavior or inhibitory behavior. But what they do to protect themselves is to control their environment as much as they can. So finally, I'm just going to touch a little bit on the neurotyping system. Like, I don't want to, this was developed by Christian Thibaudeau. He knows it much better than I do. I just want to talk a little bit about it because this was kind of the system that led me ultimately to study my research, and it led me to look at the effects of neurotransmitters, personality assessments on exercise performance. So I just want to, just give a little brief touch on it, just to pique your interest. So basically in this assessment, it characterizes you after a test as one of 5 neurotypes. So a neurotype is determined or characterized by a neurotransmitter, excitatory neurotransmitter dominance, as well as an inhibitory neurotransmitter dominance. And this is kind of one of the reasons why I find this system more complete compared to a Braverman assessment, because it's looking at both sides of the coin. So after being classified as one of five types, basically you are theoretically going to respond better to certain training styles or certain training variables such as intensity, frequency, variation, and volume. Okay. I don't have enough experience to, make any conclusions regarding the, let's say, if there's a real association between different types, neurotransmitter types, and certain training styles. But what I do find and what I've seen is that depending on a type or depending on a personality type, you need to alter kind of the way you coach. So I'll give you an example. I've had a couple athletes that tend to be a little bit more, let's say, you could tell that they're a little bit more prone to anxiety-like behavior. As soon as the weight starts to get heavy, you could tell they start to get anxious. But if you see the bar moves like it's 85%. But as soon as you add just a 5 pound, let's say, which is an extra 2%, okay, to them it feels like it's 100%, and they kind of get a little anxious and their performance decreases. So you can make a case for someone who has more, let's say, more prone to high levels of arousal. You need to manipulate the intensity and spend more time in the low intensity range, because higher intensity will lead to eventual burnout, or they may not perform well in high intensity conditions. Whereas someone who just thrives on lifting heavy weights, well, then you could use, say, higher intensity techniques, or use heavier loads more frequently. But again, what I love about the neurotyping system is that it looks at both the yin and the yang. So the inhibitory side, or the inhibitory dominance, is a very good way to determine how much, let's say, how the recovery is or how fast they were able to recover. So let's say someone with low levels of inhibitory neurotransmitters, such as the type 3, well, high intensity lifting will leave their arousal levels very high. So let's say with the training, there's an increase in norepinephrine levels, and which ultimately leads to desensitization if it's left high too long, which happens typically in this case because they don't have the inhibitory side to, let's say, quiet down the excitatory side of the nervous system. So, you know, I want to say that the system wasn't validated by research or by science. So it's, you know, do I believe in it or not? I don't know. I don't know yet. I don't have enough experience to make conclusions. But what I can say is that all the science behind the system makes a lot of sense. And I wouldn't be doing my research on this specific topic if I didn't believe in it. So, you know, I'm going to show a stronger case for why it may be effective, an effective assessment tool for coaches in the next video. So if you guys find this stuff interesting, the next video is going to be kind of where it all comes together and all kind of makes sense. And you'll see how these different neurotransmitters and the different personality types may affect an athlete's performance or just performance in general. So stay tuned for the next video, guys. If you guys have any comments, just let me know. All right. My email is typically in the show notes. So, you know, don't be afraid to give me a shout out. All right. All right. We'll see you guys next time.